Welcome back to the Titans of Foodservice podcast. Today, I welcome Greg Graber, the CEO of Heritage Brands. Him and I, we go into detail on his story throughout the restaurant industry. I think it's a conversation you're really going to find interesting. Let's go ahead and welcome Greg to the podcast. Greg, welcome to the Titans of Foodservice podcast. I'm so excited to have you join me here today. I'm grateful that you took time out of your schedule to have a conversation, and I'm looking forward to learning your story and more about you.
Thanks, Nick. Hey, I'm glad to be here.
So why don't we start off with maybe can you give a little bit of your background and how you got into the restaurant industry?
Yeah. Well, when I was growing up, I would have never thought I was going to be in the restaurant industry. I mean, my first job was delivering pizza for Domino's when I was 17. So that was back when you had to be there 30 minutes or less. So I broke a lot of traffic laws, and I then moved on. I got a little bit older and went into full service. Was a server, like a lot of folks in our industry. And the owners kept asking me to be an assistant manager, and I kept turning them down because I couldn't take the pay cut. And over time, I don't know if they wore me down or I saw opportunity, but decided to jump in full force and sort of move my way up the ranks. I cut my teeth on a concept called Don Pablo's Mexican Kitchen in Texas. And then shortly after that, they opened their first location outside of Texas in Indianapolis. And so my wife, Johnette, and our 4-year-old son, and she was 7 months pregnant. And we just were packed up and moved to Indianapolis and ended up opening restaurants all over Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. And as we opened them, I kind of moved up and was supervising those 3 states. Then moved back to the home office in Texas and told the ownership it's war out there, and we were growing awful fast, and we were in need of some process and some help. I'd trained a bunch of the managers that were out there, and so they allowed me to take an ops services role. And I had trouble getting it all rolled out. So then I took training as well. And just over time, just started grabbing different responsibilities, purchasing, marketing, just different areas of the business. And stayed there for quite some time. And then in 2005, we moved to California to be the president of a concept called Tahoe Joe's Famous Steakhouse. It was a regional steak chain. And it was a wholly owned subsidiary of Buffets Inc., which turned into Ovation Brands. And after being there for a few years, I moved to the parent company as the chief operating officer and then ultimately the CEO for a few months until we got it sold off. And as I was out there looking for something to do, I got a phone call from Randy and Deborah Brooks, who owned these concepts that we currently own now. And they were looking for an exit strategy, and I was looking for something to do. And they've just really wonderful people. And so we started Heritage Restaurant Brands in 2016. And that is what I've been doing with my life the last, I don't know if it's 20 or 7 years. It seems like a lot, but that's what I've been doing here recently.
Yeah, it's definitely a fast-paced industry, as you know.
Yeah.
Is this a career path that you always felt that you were going to go into or you wanted to be in? Or how did you... or was there something else that you wanted to do instead?
You know, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I love athletics. I love sports, and actually went to school for that, and ended up dropping out and becoming a restaurant guy. I would have never imagined that I would have been in the restaurant business, but I grew to love it. And I'll tell you, Nick, if you're competitive, this is a great business to be in, because I can, at the micro level, I can go to any table at any time and know whether we're winning or not, by the expression and the attitudes of our guests, whether we're delivering on our promise. And then, of course, there's the opportunity to park next to somebody next door. And in our business, when you're a small guy, you can go up against the giants of the industry right across the street and compete head to head. And if you're better, you win. So I think the competitive nature of the business was really enticing to me.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned you did purchasing, you did marketing, and you've done so many
Yeah,
different aspects in the
yeah.
restaurant business. How did you learn how to do all of that?
Trial and error. I mean, there are a lot of great people along the way, and so there might be some subject matter experts in those departments, and I was placed to help guide and lead them, and so I really leaned on them early on. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter in our business what department you're running. If you exist to serve both those that serve our guests and our guests, you're going to be in great shape. And so, finding faster, better, cheaper ways for our managers to do their jobs, finding ways to, and even on the marketing side, to really ferret out what is the compelling piece of our business? What's the differentiator between us and the competition? How do we leverage that up and do more of what we do best instead of worrying about what everyone else does? So, all these departments, these support departments, work hand in hand. Ultimately, though, it leads to the table, it leads to the guest. So, uh, from that operations background, being able to bring that perspective in, saying, "Hey, this is ultimately going to be better for our managers," turned out pretty well.
Yeah. And I'm curious, you mentioned that if you were to go into one of your units, you can tell if you're essentially being successful.
Yeah,
When you look at one of your concepts or just a single unit
yeah,
as part of one of your concepts, what is it that you look for in terms of success?
yeah. Well, you can tell as a consumer or as a brand owner or a restaurant owner, you can tell, Nick, when you walk through the front doors of a restaurant whether or not it has a heartbeat, whether it's
Mm,
got a pulse, whether it's alive. And, sometimes it's really hard to put your finger on it. But in general, right, I mean, there are three sort of pillars to all restaurant business. I mean, it's the atmosphere, and that might be the music, it's the temperature, it's the lighting, it's the feel of the place. Certainly the food and the style of food and how that comes out and the value you're giving our guests. And then the service, or to put a finer point on it, hospitality. There's a difference between service and hospitality. I mean, service is rote. Hospitality is a connection. It's a personal interaction. I can get service from an ATM, right? But I can only get
sure.
hospitality from a person. And so when you see those things jiving, when you see, man, the place feels great, the lighting's good, the music works, the food is exactly as it was designed to be, and people are making personal connections table side, that's it, right? It's hard not to win when you do those things well. The
Right.
tricky part is doing those things well consistently.
Yeah, definitely. There's by my house, there's a little it's a juice shop, and it's a
Yeah.
chain. I think they have maybe two
Mm,
or three locations. And there's a drink that my wife and I we really like, but every time we go there, we know that it doesn't taste the same each
yeah.
time. And
Mm.
we're hopeful that when we go there that it's the good one and not the bad one. Um so it's kind of a toss up. So how would you say that you maintain consistency across all of your restaurant locations? Is there a process that you have in place to ensure quality control, or how do you manage
Sure.
that?
Sure. Well, it starts on the purchasing end, Nick, and getting the right quality through the back door and managing that. When we took it over in 2016, and I'll talk about our Huckleberries brand because it's really
Yeah.
the growth vehicle. First we had to know what we were selling, and we took a look at what is it that the consumers want, and then really engineered the menu to either maximize profitability for our franchisees or give them more, give the guests more of what we're proudest of and what we do best and what differentiates us. Um, and once we did that, we started paring the menu down. We actually took the menu from 74 items to 54 items to give us a little bit more predictability. Once you get the predictability, then you can go to manufacturers and you can go to folks and say, listen, with our growth projections and we know exactly what we're selling, this is what we want to bring in the back door, because it really allows you to improve quality, and then doing the very best we can to um, utilize products as often as possible, and then put very specific steps to these plate building. So you buy the right product in the back door, and then you build the plate right. I think you're going to, by and large, hit the mark.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. In your journey between, kind of day one to today, has there been
Mhm.
have you had any like big failures or big missteps or obstacles that you've had to overcome from and that you learned from?
Well, I learned a lot. Honestly, Nick, I walked in with all the answers, especially in one of the brands, and that's a big mistake, right? And
Right.
without seeking to understand first, and I wasn't super familiar with breakfast, so I asked a lot more questions on our Huckleberries brand and our Perco's Cafe brand for the Cool Hand Luke's, which is
Yep.
a steakhouse. I was a little bit more familiar with it, and I really failed to completely understand our guest, the history of the brand, and went in and sort of shot first and asked questions later, and it backfired. I mean, I made some mistakes, and had to eat some crow and do some apologizing and say, you know what, I should have talked to you guys first. Um, but like with anything, whether it's a bad hire or bad
Mhm.
decision, you just fail fast and move on. I mean, you can't really dwell on it. Um, Failing isn't bad. You learn a lot. It's not bad. It's only bad if you hang on to it.
Right. Right. For heritage restaurant brands, do you own each of those locations or is it a franchisee model? How does it set up?
Yeah, we're primarily franchised. I mean,
Yeah.
my partners and I have a few of the restaurants. We've got a couple of the steakhouses and one of the Huckleberries, but it's primarily a franchise operation, which was a whole new learning curve for me as well.
Very interested to learn more about that. In my business, we're a food service broker and we cover Northern California, Southern California, and then Las
Yeah.
Vegas as well. And kind of having uh, not really a franchisee model, however, building
Hmm.
standard operating procedures across each one of our markets.
Yeah.
So whatever client that we're working with, it looks the exact same in Northern Cal as
Yeah.
it does in Los Angeles.
Right.
So I'm curious how when a franchisee or when you're pitching your concept to somebody to become a franchisee, what does that look like? What's kind of the package and do you have a standard operating procedures that you offer to them?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've got of course the operating manuals, but our relationship or our conversation with the franchisees, I mean, it's got to start with being relational, not just transactional, Nick. And because if we're just going out there and saying, look, here's the steps, follow those, here's the manual, it just doesn't work when something like, we experienced it with COVID not too long ago, right? The pandemic. And when it hits the fan, if you don't have relationship,
Right.
um, right, you're dead. And
Yeah, totally.
so it allows you then to weather the storm when you do that. Of course, we've got operating procedures, recipes, and ounces and pieces, and steps of service, and all
Right.
the sort of build out that's necessary to get there. But in a franchisee's case, I mean, we start with the who and then the what, not the other
Sure.
way around.
Sure. And what about in terms of you give them the manual and then how do you
Mm.
hold them accountable to making sure that they stick to it? Because I see a lot of times maybe a franchise model, there might be some franchisees that like to do their own thing, have their own items on the menu. How do you manage
Yeah.
that?
Well, I'll go back to the root, which is what's coming in the back door. I mean, if you can track what everyone's
Yeah.
buying, you
Yeah.
can really get a good sense for it. And then, our visits to the restaurants aren't gotcha visits at all. I mean, first of all,
Right.
when there's some variations. If I was going in and taking over on a chain of, call it 10 or 15 restaurants, doesn't really matter, of all company owned, it's a very different approach than when you're taking a franchise system together, right?
Hmm.
Company owned, you gather everyone and say, here's your new plan, and you go to the races. But for a franchise, these are business owners that are very successful in their own right. And so
Right.
you find quick wins, things that would garner their attention, and things that are mutually beneficial for both sides. And over time, when you start making good decisions for the restaurants, the conversations become much shorter, because they know that we have their best interest at heart. Yes, we
Yeah.
go visit. We certainly do a lot of guest satisfaction type stuff to make sure, and mystery shops to make sure that it's all there. But it starts with checking the purchasing logs. And if we know what they're buying, we know that the end result's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned COVID. What was that like for you? And was there a pivot that you did in that time? What maybe like a 10,000 foot view of how that went?
Yeah, I mean, it was scary as heck. I mean,
Yeah,
when your revenue shuts down to zero, and most of our restaurants are in California, and so some states were more restrictive than others. And when we knew that that it was done, we stayed up all night putting in curbside delivery and what those processes looked like. Got on the phone with our franchisees, and one of the things, I give them all the credit. We made a statement that we're not going to make any changes to these brands in pandemic that we're not willing to live with post pandemic. So we're not jerking the guest around, or we're not jerking our employees around that have to change. And so those changes that we made, Nick, were subtle,
yeah.
and it allowed us to emerge with brands intact, which really boded well for us.
Going through, having my business in California, there was a lot of, I'd say, political intervention,
Yeah,
especially economically, in
yeah.
terms of, our customer base is folks like yourself, the restaurants or food
Yeah.
service operators. And it might be a casino or a college university.
Hmm.
And when you couldn't open up your doors, or it stuck to just takeout, and I'm on a commission basis, it was
Yeah.
it was a very hard year and a half to navigate. One thing that I found in my business is that there was a big, uh, maybe like a boom in technology. There's so much
Hmm.
more technology we use today in 2023 than we did in 2019 and 2020. Is there new technology that you have incorporated into your operations that stem from the time of COVID till today?
Yeah, I mean, of course, delivery is a big deal, because it was the deal during COVID, and it didn't go away. I mean, one of the reasons that all the brands are so far up over pre-COVID years is that the delivery stuck and the dining room came back, and
Right.
so it's just become additive to what we're doing. So, I mean, we're in the process right now of revamping our entire website, right, for our Huckleberries. So that we can perhaps be a little bit more advantageous, and give our franchisees the advantage of first party delivery, which would be very helpful for them. Those fees really add up
Yeah.
over time. And so we're doing everything we can to mitigate their cost on the back end.
Do you typically like to get set up, or do you want to get set up on like DoorDash, Uber Eats,
Yep.
those types of websites?
You bet. As many as those channels as possible. I mean, when it hits the fan, or even in sort of an economic downturn, you want to create a place that has as many what I'll call occasion usages as possible, whether
Sure.
it's a quick meal or a celebratory meal or something delivery at home. We want to be good at it all. At least give the opportunity for guests to use this in a variety of ways.
Right. My uncle, he owns a retail meat market, and he
Okay.
makes pre-made sandwiches for the local community. People who come in the door, but he's not set up yet online. It's like a very traditional butcher shop. It's been
Hmm.
around for 40 years. And what's kind of the first step in how do you build it into your pricing model to get some like an online
Right.
platform that people can go on and buy? Because I keep telling him, I was like, you need to move online. He's right down the street from Cal State Fullerton, which has 20, 30,000 students. And all of
Right.
those students, especially millennials and Gen Z, they're moving digital, they're moving online,
Hmm.
and they may not find you if they have to walk in the door.
Yeah, I think that first you got to face the facts that delivery is not going to be as profitable as serving someone inside your restaurant. You don't get the additional add-ons. You may not get an app, or you may not get a dessert or a drink or whatever. And the fees are not there inside the restaurant, and they are there
Sure.
after, outside the restaurant. But my wife's grandfather, before he passed on, when he found out I was in the business, put his crooked finger in my face and say, Greg, volume covers everything. and I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now, right? Where these incremental sales that come in the door, they sure do help you with your fixed costs, and they help you with your rent and the things that aren't there. So maybe the margins are skinnier, but they're
Yeah.
still there, provided you can execute at a high level.
I like that. I've not I like that term a lot. My business is the same, being a commission business, volume, you're right, it covers everything.
It
The
sure
more
does. I
volume we
mean,
can sell, the more we're gonna make.
yeah, I mean, think about it in the heart of the house or in the kitchen in a low volume restaurant. If you lose a case of steaks, it stings for weeks. If you're
Right.
jamming and you've got a high volume restaurant, and you drop it, it hurts, but not nearly as bad.
And then what about staying up on industry trends? How do you how do you track consumer
hmm
trends, and especially with Gen Z and millennials now being a big part of the overall
Yeah.
population?
Yep. I mean, we partner with with a variety of folks out there, but these big vendors they've got a ton of consumer research. They will tell you what's going on if you just ask them. So we utilize a lot of our vendor partners and ask them often, what's going on in the consumer world, where are things headed, and I would say that our brands don't want to be on the very forefront or the cutting edge of technology, because by and large that's not our guest.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that we're excluding all of these Gen Z folks, far from it. But it's not the bulk of our guests, and so we can
Right.
sometimes get too far out in front. Our Huckleberries brand is, breakfast is very experiential.
Sure.
And I can make eggs at home or have a bowl of cereal at home. When I'm going out, I want that experience. And so I still firmly believe that there's always going to be a place for come in, leave your brain in the glove box in the parking lot, and go into a full service restaurant and be taken care of.
Right. You mentioned Huckleberries. I believe I was reading online that you have about 6 more locations upcoming, and I believe they're spread out across different states. How do you, I guess in most simple terms, how do you do that? Where do you start to open up new locations, and why choose those locations?
Yeah, I mean, so when we started in 2016, we had 7 Huckleberries. We've got 31 today.
Wow.
And our plan is to grow 35% a year, which would get us to 100 by the end of 2026. They are primarily in California. We've got one in Nevada. We're about to open one in Dallas Fort Worth. And Nick, in a perfect world, I would just go 100 miles at a time and just slowly grow. But I mean, sometimes you gotta skip over a little bit. And a 3 hour plane ride or a 3 hour car ride is the same to me. And so if you find that right franchisee in that right market, then we're going to go there. Part of the foundation setting that we did in that first 18 months was to make sure that we're foundationally ready to grow nationally, whether that's distribution or purchasing contracts or whatever that might look like. So today it's just not really all that difficult to jump a few states and go to Texas. We just
Hmm.
get on a plane and go.
I love that. And if someone's in Texas, majority of your locations are here in California, how would they find you?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. When we opened up in Reno, which was nobody had heard of Huckleberries, we opened up in San Diego, which was a couple of 100 miles from the nearest one, and we're about to open up in Dallas Fort Worth. And this is when you've got a tiger by the tail, when you put a little social media post out there and you get like 70,000 hits on it the next day, and people are talking about it. I mean, I would love to take credit for that, but I can't. I mean,
Right.
there's something, whatever that is, whatever that magic is, and there's only just a few brands that I've ever been associated with that had that when you got going. I mean, it's got to be the atmosphere, it's got to be the food. Breakfast and lunch are, for whatever reason, people get excited about that, and we have a pretty unique niche in the space. So social media is a big way to do it, and
Right.
once we get open, then we have to execute.
And the way it works, someone pays up front And then and then you own the real estate, or do they own the real estate?
No, they would go out and find really any landlord, somebody that would own the real estate. I mean,
Okay.
one of the things we did during COVID was had somebody come in, a national player come in and do an evaluation of all of our sites. 10-minute drive time, the physical makeup of our guests, the retail presence, the psychographic, and just all the demographic information, including their propensity to eat out, and then specifically to eat breakfast out. And we developed a scorecard based on our top 5 restaurants. And that's just the science of it. The art of it is me and one of my partners will go out there with the franchisees and kick the tires on all these sites and say, well, I know what the numbers say, but it doesn't really feel right because of X. And so we'll try to present the very best options for our franchisees, including what it might cost to get into one of these things so they can get their best return.
Did you say you'd get a score of your top 5 restaurants?
Yes, we developed. Well, I called it a scorecard. It's a
Their
real
scorecard.
estate scorecard. Yes, so that we put
Okay.
all these metrics against the ones that do the best, and then for new sites, we would get those same metrics and compare them to see how we're doing. And if it doesn't measure up, maybe there's something else we should look at, or maybe we should go look somewhere else.
Gotcha. Gotcha. It's so fascinating. I can feel the wheels turning in your head. You have so much information, so much knowledge. If you could
Yep.
go back, think about if you were to go back to your very first day when you were working at Domino's, what would you tell yourself at that point? Eh, With all the knowledge you have today, what would you tell yourself? I'm just curious.
You have the ability to do it, and half the folks out there that don't make it aren't trying hard enough. And so I would say, don't be afraid to take risk. You've got it within you. Just go do it.
I like that. And then since COVID, as we've talked about, there's so much change that has happened. Do you have any new beliefs or behaviors or habits that you've picked up since that time that you use today?
Well, I told you before, relationships are super important. I do
Yeah.
believe, Nick, that COVID brought every operator, every business owner closer to their business. I got much closer to the restaurants during COVID because we had to.
Sure.
There were less employees running around, less team members running around, and you had to go out there and get very close to the business. And quite frankly, it had been a while for me since I had gotten that close into the restaurants, and so it was refreshing, and it reminded me perhaps some things that I had forgotten. So I'm trying to hang on to that.
Yeah, definitely. And what are some of the goals that you're pursuing now, today, and then into the future?
Well, I think the growth rate of Huckleberry is a 35% growth rate with some of the challenges of accessing capital out there. We got a lot of folks that are really interested. I think maintaining, you hear this magic word, culture, maintaining that sort of big company thinking in a family company. You know what that's like,
Yeah.
where you're like, hey, we don't want to lose that personal touch, and so we're
Right.
committed to having some personal involvement in every single restaurant that opens up. Um,
Right.
that's gonna help us grow, and that 35% growth rate would probably be the single biggest thing that's going to move our needle forward.
Sure. I have a personal question as well. In
Yeah,
my own business, being a young entrepreneur, I'm 29. I found,
yeah,
when we first started out, when we were going from when we $0 to our first $1 million. In that time, it required myself, business owner, to do a lot of things, whether it's the finances or going out and making sales or dropping off
yeah.
samples or marketing, whatever. I kind of did it all. But now, as we get into the next stage, going from that 1 to 10, and we're in that evolution now, I find myself, I need to remove myself from a lot of different parts of the business, not have my personal interference on a lot of different
Hmm.
things, because I feel like it creates a bottleneck in communication and slows down our processes. How do you manage that? I would imagine just the size of your business and with how many locations that you work with, that you can't be involved in everything in the day to day. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, you can. I mean, so when we first started, there were like the three partners, and we would have just a couple of folks at the office, and it was small, and so we wore a lot of hats. And the bigger you get, the more subject matter experts you're able to bring in, and let them solely focus on whatever it is, whether it's HR or whether it's purchasing. And so you got to hire right. You got to hire
Yeah.
folks with the right DNA. That are in alignment with your values, in alignment with your goals, that care for one another, and that care for the company. And then you got to be willing to let go and let failures happen,
Yeah.
because folks are going to fail. And you got to, if it's the right person, you all say this, right? Right decision, right motive, you get an A. Wrong
Yep.
decision, right motive, you get a B. No decision, you get an F. And so, just really giving folks a call to action. And if the motives are right, hey, we're going to make mistakes. Let's move on.
Right. Right. What about your day to day in your day to day life? What challenges do you face, whether it's on a monthly basis or a yearly basis? What are some of those challenges? What do they look like?
Just keeping in touch with all of the, our expansive team, right? I mean, the team I wouldn't say it's expansive. Our team has expanded,
Right.
and it's got in there, and just making sure that they have, I'll call it a compass and not a map, meaning this is the direction that we're going in. And I don't want to direct every turn, but I am responsible for making sure that everybody knows sort of where we're going. And Nick, at 30,000 feet, with we named our company Heritage after our family and spiritual values, and we call it honoring the past and building a legacy for the future. And then you sort of move it down to 15,000 feet, and we call it serving others to build something great. And then when the rubber meets the road, it's improving the sales and profitability of our restaurants. So we sort of use that as a framework for where we're headed.
I love that. That is awesome. What about for others who are listening to this podcast that one day, I actually, let me take a step back. I am for the local high school here where I live, they have a mentorship program.
Mm,
And juniors at the school can sign up for the program and they get paired with mentors, people that are
hmm
in industries that they'd like to be in. And I got the one kid in the school who wants to be in the restaurant business. And his aspiration is actually to be an owner of a restaurant chain. That's what he wants to do. Right now he's working in the back of kitchens and kind of learning,
mm.
everything that there is to learn from the ground up. What advice would you give to somebody like him who would one day want to be like you, the CEO of a restaurant chain?
Well, first of all, I'd say be careful what you ask for. Uh, there's a, there's a on those days where you have to make those certain decisions, it can be daunting. But
Yeah.
everybody wants to know how to do it. Not everybody wants to do what it takes to do it. And so my advice would be learn as much as you can,
Hmm.
but take action. If he's back there learning right now, that's the very best thing that he could do. I mean, our business affords anyone the opportunity to sort of pull themselves up by their bootstraps and go get it done. And if you've got the talent and desire, you don't have to graduate from college to be a restaurant general manager. You don't have to graduate from college to be a director of operations or
Right.
anything else in our business. That real life learning means something. And the other thing I would say is that character matters. And
Yeah.
your good character is going to win out in the long run. So be tough on standards, and compassionate towards people, and you'll be just fine.
Yeah. He's also taking the path, he's working for a well-known chef here in the local
Mm,
area. And so he's getting almost like an apprenticeship watching this
yeah.
chef, and all the creations, the way he runs the operations.
hmm
Was that Did you have a little bit of that when you were going from your start to where you are now? Anybody like a mentor or people that took you under their wing?
Oh, sure. All the way through.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's not one person, but it's one person at that stage in life. And whether at and typically they're not five levels up, right?
Right.
Where I'm like an assistant manager and I want to learn from the CEO. I want to learn from my general manager. And so, really early on at every stage, there are people that you can learn from. And
Right.
believe me, there are people you can learn what not to do too. Right. Whenever I get my hands on the wheel, I will not be doing that. That did not seem to be
Right.
working out pretty well. So just, pay
Right.
attention. Many times, Nick, when I go into a restaurant and you'll ask a server about a manager, they'll say, "Oh man, I love him," or "I love her,"
That's right.
and I'll say, "Why?" Right?
Yeah.
How come? And a lot of times they can't put their finger on it. They're just like, you know what? I don't know. But when she's here, things just seem to run better. And what she
Right.
does is she doesn't plan her next steps. She plans the next three steps. So she's always thinking ahead during the shift. What can I do to make things easier for my team to do their jobs? And that is sort of, a learned experience. I watched a lot of people over my career
Yeah.
do that very thing.
Yeah, definitely. I read a interesting book in 2022. I believe it was called Setting the Table by Danny Meyer. I don't know if you've ever heard of this
Mm,
book before.
yes.
And he was the founder of concepts like Shake Shack.
Right.
And he said a big part of his success is when a consumer comes in and feels like that restaurant or that location is their restaurant, like they own it, and
Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
rapport with the management and the staff, and they invite their friends. It's almost like they own the place.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you think about, Nick, with you and your wife, right there, you have a very
Yeah.
small subset of restaurants that you go to for a particular occasion. If it's a nice dinner out or if it's something quick, we are really consumers are creatures of habit, and they're going to go to a
Yes.
place where they feel warm, where they feel, welcome, where they feel important, even that they might have some input. And regular guests are way less costly when you make a mistake because they're so much more
Yes.
forgiving. A first time guest, when I screw it up, man, I'm giving them the farm because I want to come back. Somebody, if I've known you and you've been coming in for 5 years and I overcook your steak, I'm like, hey Nick, sorry about that. Got another one coming, and you're like, hey, no problem.
Yeah,
So those
exactly.
relationships that you build work both ways.
Yeah, definitely. I totally get that. Um, what do you see as the future of the restaurant industry in terms of new concepts coming along or maybe consumer preferences changing? What do you feel is on the horizon?
Well, I mean, I think you've seen lots and lots and lots of people dabble with these ghost kitchens that
Right.
are really virtual brands that are out there, but they really seem to come and go. And I think that the restaurants and the restaurateurs that are able to really identify their strengths, identify their points of differentiation, and not be swayed or tempted to go out there and try 25 different things. Just do what you do best. Look at
Right.
Chick-fil-A, look at In-N-Out. I mean, there are several out there that,
Yeah.
and maybe brands won't be that myopic, but there are certain things that you do best. And I think the ones that are going to survive or really have a good sense of who they are. That might be a cutting edge concept. That might be
Right.
somebody that does something, but they're going to do it better than anyone else. When you try to be sort of all things to all people, you're not
Yeah.
very good at any of them.
I heard a quote one time. It went something like, Make the main thing the main thing."
Yeah.
Simplify your approach. You don't have to go out and do a million different things.
Yep.
I was recently in a entrepreneurial group, and in the group, people were saying, "Well, this is my business. This is what I do, but I also want to offer this, 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 and this." And you kind
Yep.
of start to lose that focus, and
Hmm.
you become a jack of all trades, master of none, and you kind of
Right.
dilute your efforts.
Yeah, I used to work for somebody that told me the difficulties in the simplicity, and what he meant by that was, or the way I took it was the stop doing lists are more
Mhm.
important than the to do list, and that's actually part of my job. To be honest, is to make sure that we're just staying on track and not veering too far off. The bigger you get, the more ideas start pouring in, and again, I'll use that compass, that sort of true north. If I have a map to Detroit and I'm in Miami, it doesn't matter. It doesn't help, but you can always know where north is no matter where you're at. And so
Right.
my job is to kind of keep us focused on what our true north is.
I like that. What about looking far into the future? When you look back, when you're all said and done, is there something, which I know is way off in the future? Is there something that you'd want to be remembered for? Maybe something personal and something professional.
Well, personal, it starts with my wife, Johnette, and our four children and our two grandchildren. I'll say so far because we're ready for some more. That's what matters. I mean, it
Yes.
really does. Is that, on the personal side, that I lived a life that was full of character and really cared for my family and for other people. On the professional side, if somebody would look back and say, you know what, because of your presence, I had opportunity. I had the ability to go out and make something of myself, whether that's being a franchisee or being a restaurant manager or being a director of operations or fill in the blank. That if they said I saw something in them that they didn't see in themselves and we were able to bring it out, that would be pretty gratifying.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, that would be very satisfying. I could definitely resonate with that. Well, Greg, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining me here on the Titans of Food Service podcast. I really appreciate you being vulnerable and going in depth about your journey. I say this that I didn't realize when I started this podcast how much I would learn by
Mm.
interviewing people who are successful or gotten to the top of what they do, or even on their way to being successful. And I took away so many different nuggets from our conversation. So I just want to say thank you so much for taking time and coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.